We found it's supposed to be a poster on the USDA Forest Service site, and it's a publicly owned photo, it says, so I think it should be okay to use. And my wife wanted to print it out and put a frame around it, and I decided that instead of going with a standard paper mat around it like I usually do, that I was going to try to make it look a little bit more natural looking. For the mat, I had a piece of Catalpa, I think you call it. Some people call it Catawba too, but it was from a tree that I had taken down probably 20 years ago. And I decided to slice that up into some 1/8 inch thick slices and miter the corners and glue it up for a mat. And you can see that clamping board that I made a while back actually works pretty good for gluing this kind of stuff up. I do put down some wax paper first so that I don't get glue on it, but the glue up came out real nice and I'm happy with it. Came out really nice and flat too. And next I cut some pieces of walnut up just to make a really thin, simple frame to go around the outside of it. And I mitered the corners, and also I plan on using the clamping board to glue that together also and hold it in place while it dries. I use some Elmer's wood glue, and I just apply that to all surfaces that are going to be glued together. Just put on a nice thin coat of it so it doesn't ooze out too bad. And once all the surfaces are coated with glue, I'm just going to hold them together and use the wedge-shaped clamps for the jig that I built to just kind of hold everything together until the glue sets up and dries. Using the clamping board with the pins and wedges really helps making glue up anything that's kind of square or rectangular like this. A really simple job, and it does clamp it pretty good, hold everything in place, and it just takes a second to do it. While the glue on the frame is drying, I've decided to put a little bit of Danish oil on the mat part that I made, and that will get 3 coats, and then it will be finished with a paste wax after the 3 coats dry and are sanded. I downloaded the file and I wound up printing it out on a piece of HP photo paper. And it was a little bit small for the size of the frame, so I used some spray adhesive to put it on a bigger piece of foam board backing so I could keep it centered. When the glue dried, I took my RO sander to the frame just to clean it up a little bit and get it ready for the next steps. The glue's only been drying for about an hour, so I kind of like to keep it clamped just so I don't shake it apart because the glue is not fully cured. Whenever I make a frame, I like to put a reinforcement in all the corners of it, no matter how big or small it is. So the next thing that I do is I go over to the table saw and I set up my it's got this big old cast iron jig to hold it at a 45-degree angle, and I just kind of cut a notch in each corner of it. This is just a small frame, so all I'm going to do is just one slot with one pass of the saw blade each on each corner of it, and then I'll just use a 10/1000 piece of wood to fill the splines. Sometimes I'll go with a contrasting color, but with this one I just decided to stick with the walnut. So I ripped some walnut to the proper thickness, and then I just take and put a little bit of glue in each spline, and I try to spread it in there a little bit with a brush if I can, and I'll brush a little bit on the spline also, but I think most of it will wind up squeezing out in the end, but there's always enough to hold it tight left. Once the splines are in, I find that just using one of those spring type clamps will hold everything in place pretty good while the glue dries. So here it is with all the 4 splines put in it now. Once that glue sets up for a while, what I do is, first thing I do is I take it to my bandsaw and I just take a rough cut, and I'll leave maybe 1/8 of an inch or so of the spline sticking out. I don't want to get too close to wind up nicking the wood or anything, but I find that this is a good starting point. And Then once I have all 8 corners cut on the bandsaw so that they're, relatively close, what I do is I go over to my disc sander and I sand them down so that they're just about flush. But I don't want to hit the edge with a disc sander because it will leave some gouges. One thing to remember is always wear a dust mask and have your dust collector turned on when sanding walnut. Then I go back and I'll take a block of sandpaper with a piece of wood to keep it flat. And I'll kind of just sand everything down flush and then just go over everything and do a final sanding with the little RO sander. And that's about it. And whenever I'm going to try and finish both sides of a project, I usually look for a hidden spot where I can screw a couple of the Craig screws in, a couple threads, just to hold everything up, so that will allow me to finish both sides at the same time. With the Craig screws, actually, it's nice because they're self-tapping and self-starting, so it doesn't take a lot of pressure and it won't split out anything, but at the same time, it'll keep it elevated while you finish it. Then I went back and I put 3 coats of the same Danish oil on the frame here, and I sand it with 320 paper between the coats, and then after that, I decided to get lazy for the glass, and I had some old sashes laying around that I decided to take apart and try to use the glass out of it. Well, I took apart the first one, and then I got out my glass cutters, and things didn't go so well. It turned out with the first cut that I tried to make that the cutter was an extremely dull old one that didn't work good, and the glass just kind of shattered when I went to try to break it on the line. But for the next attempt, I took and I tried a different cutter that I had. These things were like 90-year-old cutters from my father. And the second piece came out all right. And after the oil is dry, I like to put a coat of the old-fashioned Johnson's paste wax on it to kind of give it a little bit of extra protection. And then actually using steel wool, when you put it on, it breaks the shine a little bit. So you get a little bit more of a natural matte finish. And here are the parts that are all ready to be assembled now. They have 3 coats of Danish oil on them, and they both have a coat of wax on them, so everything's ready to go. The first thing I did is I decided to take a couple pieces of double-sided tape and use that to hold the mat onto the print so everything wouldn't slide around at a later point and possibly see some white edges or anything like that. And then I put the piece of glass, laid that down into the frame. I made sure that I really cleaned everything good and I had the frame face down. And the next thing I just had to do was flip the mat and the picture over and drop it on top of the glass. To hold the picture and backing and mat and everything in place, I usually use these little things, I think they call them glass push pins, and you just take an old chisel you don't care about and slide them on the backing and just give them a couple of taps, and they lock everything in place really good. And I did actually clamp this whole thing down on my clamp board to keep it from moving around when I put the points in. But as you can see, it's real simple and quick to get it out. And here is what the finished assembled frame looks like. There is some sawdust on it. You can see the markings on it, but that'll be wiped off later. Then I like to seal the back of it when I'm done with, I have a very heavy duty packaging tape that's got like super sticky stuff on it that works pretty good. And I put that all around the frame to seal out any areas where dust or anything could possibly get in there later, because there's really no way to clean the glass. And for hanging this one, I'm just going to use one of these little metal hanging brackets. Sometimes I'll use wire if it's a little bit bigger print, but this one seemed to be small enough, and they come with some little nails that you just pound them in place. So here is the finished picture frame with the mat and everything else, and I'm real happy with the way that it came. If you look on the USDA Forest Service website, you'll find an area where they have posters, and there are many different prints that you can that are publicly owned that you can actually download and print out for yourself. This is just one of those fun little projects that has like zero cost involved and was quick and easy to make. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe.